Today we are looking at the conclusion of the Declaration of Independence. So far you've looked at the introduction and the preamble and saw that the colonists are arguing that if you're going to break away, you should give a sufficient reason for why you're doing that. And in the preamble, they went into what government is supposed to be, how it's supposed to protect people's rights. And if that government does not protect people's rights, then you have the right to break away. And then you went into the grievances, and we saw with some of the grievances that we worked with that they felt the British were destroying their property. They felt the British were putting them in jail unfairly, forcing the soldiers to live in their houses. So many different things that they felt this is the way the king is harming us and harming our colonial governments. Now you get to the conclusion. And with the conclusion, they need to make the biggest statement of all. Because of all this, we are breaking free, we are declaring an independence, and we will become the United States of America. So we're going to run through each of these parts in the conclusion, and I'll give you kind of my translation for what it means. So the first part, in every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. So what does this mean? Well, here's how I translate that. In every situation where we were harmed by the king, we petitioned him and asked for a change in his behavior. Our petitions were met with further injury. The king who acts in every way like a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. So basically saying every time the king hurt us, we petitioned, we sent messages to him and tried to ask, hey, can we make this better? And he didn't. He made things worse every time there was a problem. And so if you have a king who's a tyrant, a complete dictator, a person who has complete control, that is not the right kind of person to have as the ruler of a free people, as the colonists clearly see themselves. And so they're setting themselves up to say, hey, look, the king is not doing his job. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our emigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and of consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation and hold them as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war and in peace friends. Wow, there's a lot of big language thrown into that. But when it gets down to the basics, they're talking about the relationship that they, the colonists, have with the British people, the citizens of Britain, because the citizens of Britain have had a lot to do with the colonists. Those that are involved in trade and different things like that. Some of the citizens are their family members. And so there is a close connection with Britain because of those things. So the translation. We have warned the British people often of the ways their government has tried to control us. We have reminded them of our situation and appealed to their decency and sense of justice. We have asked them to speak up against these injustices which interrupt our relationship. They, like the king, have been deaf to our calls for justice. It is now necessary that we accept that we hold our brethren as enemies in war and friends in peace. And so basically, they've been bringing these issues up to the British citizens, and the British citizens have been deaf to it. They haven't been listening. And therefore, if we're at peace, the American colonists are friends of the British citizens. If we're at war, the American colonists are the enemies of the British citizens. And so this is a big step to say that the people you've come from are now your enemies if you're going to go to war. And they know that there's probably going to be war because the British aren't going to want to give up the colonies. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and do all the other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge with our lives, pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And so now the writer of the Declaration, Thomas Jefferson, brings it home. And, he's really saying we're independent and here's our power. So my translation: we, the representatives of the United States of America, assembled in Congress, do by the authority of people of the colonies declare that these colonies are free and independent states and are free from any control by the British. All government connections with Great Britain are cut. We, as free and independent states, have the right to declare war, make peace, create alliances, establish trade, and do everything else an independent nation has the right to do. To support this declaration, we pledge to one another our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And so in this last part, they're saying they're free. We're an independent country. And then they list the powers that they feel their country should have. It's a small list, but they also don't want to create a national government that's too strong. And the last part's interesting. To support this declaration, we pledge to one another our lives, fortunes, and sacred honor. They know that this declaration is going to cause problems and it could cause war. And by signing this document, they could be signing their death warrant, I guess you could say, because the British are probably going to come after them. They know that, and they pledge to support each other in this endeavor, this first step in creating the country that we now live in today. So on the right, you see the signatures, the famous John Hancock signature that was bigger than anybody else's. And basically, these are the signatures of the delegates of the different states, former colonies that now are declaring we are states and we are independent. And these are people that are really putting their life on the line and risking a lot to do this. So that's your declaration. It's a statement that we're independent, and it's a statement on the reasons they feel they have to be free from the British, not only because they have violated their rights, but also because the government never seemed to desire to protect their rights in the eyes of the colonists. So now comes the big part. You send it to Britain, and you see what happens and what their response is. So that is your Declaration of Independence. If you have any questions about that, feel free to talk to your teacher, and we can look it over together. Thanks.